For decades, Carl Jung mapped the hidden architecture of the human soul, but there was one psychological profile that left even him in a state of profound awe. A soft, deep bell tolls. It wasn't the narcissist, the sociopath, or even the person lost in psychosis. It was a type of individual so incredibly rare that Jung believed a seasoned therapist might meet only a few in an entire lifetime of practice. These people didn't simply experience the world on a deeper emotional level. Their internal machinery was wired so differently. It was like comparing a horse-drawn carriage to a starship. Jung referred to them as individuated sensitives, but today they are often called the Super Empath. And before you dismiss that term as another internet buzzword, you must understand, Jung wasn't talking about someone who cries during sad movies. He was describing a person whose very consciousness operates on a frequency that most of humanity cannot even detect. They don't just feel the room. They download the entire operating system of everyone in it. They perceive patterns, truths, and trajectories that are completely invisible to others. And this gift comes at a staggering cost. The tragedy Jung uncovered is that these individuals almost never know what they are. They spend years, sometimes decades, believing they are fundamentally broken, too sensitive, too strange, too overwhelmed by a world that feels like a constant, chaotic assault. They don't realize that the very experiences tearing them apart are the hallmarks of an extraordinarily rare psychological configuration, one that carries the potential for immense wisdom or immense suffering, depending entirely on whether it is understood. Today, we are going to decode the 8 definitive signs, drawn from Jung's own case studies, that separate the super empath from every other personality type. We'll explore why each sign develops, the hidden price of carrying it, and why recognizing these traits in yourself could be the single most important revelation of your life. The first sign is what Jung described as psychic osmosis, an involuntary absorption that goes far beyond mere emotion. A regular empath feels your sadness. They can sympathize and offer a comforting shoulder. But a super empath, they don't just feel the sadness. They temporarily inherit the entire architecture of your despair. They absorb the specific thought loops that keep you trapped, the physical tension knotted in your back, the unconscious beliefs that fuel your pain. They don't just sense you're anxious. They temporarily inhabit the very blueprint of your anxiety. Jung documented this in a patient who, after a single dinner with her brother-in-law, developed a sudden, crippling fear of financial collapse. This was a fear she had never experienced before in her life. The thought patterns were foreign to her. Yet, for hours after he left, her mind raced with worries about debt and ruin, until they dissolved as if they had never been there. She hadn't just caught his worry, she had borrowed his entire relationship with money. This happens because the super empath lacks the standard psychological filter, the solid wall, that most people have between self and other. Instead, they have a permeable membrane. Information, not just emotion, but the very structure of another's psyche, flows through and temporarily installs itself. If you have ever spent time with someone and then found yourself thinking thoughts that feel alien, feeling physical symptoms that arrived with them and left with them, you are not losing your mind. You are experiencing what Jung called psychic osmosis. You don't just feel others. You temporarily become their architecture. The second sign is a pattern recognition ability so acute, it can be mistaken for clairvoyance. Super empaths don't just read people, they decode them. Within moments of an encounter, their mind has unconsciously assembled a complete psychological map. They perceive the core wounds, the primary defense mechanisms, the hidden manipulation tactics, and the painful gap between the performed self and the authentic self. Jung tested this by briefly introducing his identified super empaths to his colleagues. Their descriptions were so unervingly accurate that it startled him. They could identify childhood attachment wounds and unconscious defense strategies that had taken Jung months of therapy to uncover. They weren't guessing. They were processing a tsunami of microdata, microexpressions, vocal tone fluctuations, energy shifts, word choices, breathing patterns, and synthesizing it into a portrait that was consistently, verifiably true. But here is the critical distinction. A regular empath might get a vague, gut feeling that someone is off. A super empath doesn't get a feeling, They get a detailed report. They don't just sense someone is hiding something. They can often perceive what is being hidden and why. This high-resolution perception runs constantly, without their consent, in every single social interaction. This is why a simple dinner party isn't relaxing for them. It's a psychological war zone. It's an overwhelming flood of data from every person in the room. Data they cannot stop receiving and cannot easily process. The third sign is what Jung called the fortress of compassion, the seemingly paradoxical combination of fierce, unyielding boundaries and the deepest possible wells of empathy. This is where the super empath shatters the stereotype. The regular empath archetype is someone who overgives, overaccommodates, and loses themselves in the needs of others. The super empath often does the opposite. A heavy iron gate slams shut. They maintain boundaries so firm, so impenetrable, that they are frequently misjudged as cold, aloof, or even selfish. Jung was fascinated by this paradox. How can someone who feels everything be so quick to cut someone off, to walk away from a toxic situation, to refuse to engage with emotional manipulation? The answer lies in survival. Because the super empath absorbs so much more deeply, they learned early, often through devastating experience, that unprotected exposure to certain people could annihilate them. Their boundaries are not walls built from callousness. They are blast shields forged from the knowledge of exactly how much damage unfiltered contact can inflict. The super empath who goes no contact with a family member isn't doing it because they don't care. They are doing it because they care so intensely and absorb so completely that continued contact would compromise their very sanity. They have learned that their compassion, without the fortress, leads to self-destruction. If you feel everything deeply, but have cultivated what others call a ruthless ability to walk away, you are not a contradiction. You are displaying the exact paradox Jung identified. The fourth sign is a relationship with solitude that transcends mere introversion. It is what Jung called transformative aloneness. Many empaths need quiet time to recharge. That is common. But the super empath doesn't just recharge in solitude, they transform. Their alone time is not passive recovery. It is an active, alchemical process. Their consciousness uses this time to do its most profound work. Jung observed that in solitude, super empaths spontaneously begin to integrate shadow material, process the collective emotional data they have absorbed, and generate creative insights that feel like they come from nowhere. They enter states of active imagination, where the unconscious communicates directly through potent images and sudden, undeniable knowing. Their solitude is productive in ways that go far beyond simple rest. This is why a super empath doesn't just prefer being alone. They require it with the same biological urgency that the body requires sleep. Without sufficient solitude, the accumulated psychological data backlogs. They become irritable, confused, and unable to distinguish their own thoughts and feelings from the ones they have absorbed. Their internal processor is overloaded, and the only way to clear the cache is extended, uninterrupted alone time. If your solitude feels less like resting and more like your mind is performing intense, invisible labor, if you emerge from it not just rested, but fundamentally changed, Jung would recognize you immediately. Your solitude is not an escape. It is the workshop of your soul. The fifth sign is an involuntary, physical intolerance of inauthenticity. A super empath cannot tolerate the fake. This is not a moral judgment or a cynical attitude. It is a biological imperative. Inauthenticity registers in their nervous system like a discordant note in a symphony. It is physically painful. They feel it in their body as tension, nausea, or a crawling sensation under their skin that will not stop until they remove themselves from the source. Jung studied this response because it was so universal among his subjects. They could sit in a room full of people charmed by a charismatic speaker and feel physically ill because they were perceiving the manipulation behind the charm. They could attend a family gathering where everyone performed happiness and leave with a splitting migraine because the dissonance between the performance and the underlying reality was so loud in their system that it became somatically unbearable. They can see the strings on the puppet, and they cannot unsee them, no matter how much easier life would be if they could. This intolerance also turns inward. A super empath cannot maintain their own false persona without experiencing severe internal conflict, anxiety, depression, or even physical illness. Their entire being demands congruence. The cost of wearing a mask is simply too high. The sixth sign is what Jung termed the wounded healer's depth, a compulsive drive to understand suffering at its most profound level, because they have touched it themselves. Super empaths have not just experienced pain. They have been through psychological experiences so intense that they have touched what Jung called the archetypal layer of suffering. This isn't about having the worst trauma, it's about processing depth. The same difficult event that one person experiences and moves past, the super empath experiences at every layer simultaneously. The personal wound, the family pattern it echoes, the collective human theme it represents, and the archetypal meaning beneath it all. They process vertically, while most process horizontally. This depth creates people who understand suffering in an almost uncanny way. They can sit with someone in their darkest moment and remain completely present. Not because they learned a technique, but because they have mapped that territory within themselves. They do not flinch at the darkness. But this depth carries a cost. Super empaths often experience periods that look like depression, but are actually periods of profound psychological integration. They are processing material at depths the conscious mind can barely track. They go through seasons where the weight of that processing makes normal functioning difficult, not because they are broken, but because the work their psyche is doing is genuinely monumental. The seventh sign is the painful gift of trajectory perception. A super empath doesn't just read the present moment. They perceive the trajectory. They see the early, invisible signs of a relationship's collapse, a career implosion, or a personal breakdown in others, often months or years before any visible evidence appears. Jung found this most striking in their romantic lives. They would often know, within the first few encounters, not just who a person was, but who they would become under stress. They could see the entire arc of the connection while it was still in its opening chapters. This creates an agonizing loneliness. You are watching something beautiful begin, while simultaneously perceiving its inevitable ending. You are investing in a friendship while your system is already showing you the fault line where it will eventually break. Most super empaths spend years trying to override this perception, telling themselves they are being paranoid or negative. They ignore what they see and hope for a different outcome. And time again, their original perception proves devastatingly accurate. Jung verified that this wasn't pessimism. It was a reading of the structural code running beneath the surface, projecting its inevitable output. The information was accurate. The tragedy was that no one, including the super empath, wanted to believe it. And finally, the eighth sign, which Jung considered the most defining and most essential, the possession of an integrated shadow. The super empath has not only acknowledged their dark side, but has done the difficult work to incorporate it. They know their own capacity for manipulation, selfishness, rage, and destruction. And they have consciously chosen not to deploy those capacities, while remaining fully aware that they exist. This is a radical departure from the typical empath who identifies as purely light and good. That empath is operating from a split psyche, where the shadow is denied and projected onto others. The super empath has moved beyond that split. They know they are capable of everything they perceive in the people who have hurt them. They have faced their own narcissistic tendencies and their own capacity for cruelty. And that confrontation did not destroy them. It completed them. Jung considered this the ultimate marker of individuation, the process of becoming psychologically whole, not just psychologically good. The super empath can say, I understand why someone would do that terrible thing, not as an excuse, but because they have found that same impulse in themselves and have chosen a different path. This integrated darkness is the source of their true power. True compassion isn't naive. It's forged in the fire of your own acknowledged darkness. Your compassion isn't naive. It's informed. You aren't kind because you don't know how to be cruel. You are kind because you know exactly how to be cruel and have made a conscious choice not to be. That is a fundamentally different kind of goodness, one that emerges from wholeness, not ignorance. So, here is what these 8 signs reveal. The super empath is not a better empath. They are a different category of being. Their absorption is deeper, their perception is sharper, their boundaries are stronger, their solitude is more transformative, their authenticity detector is more sensitive, Their processing is more profound, their foresight is more accurate, and their shadow is more fully integrated. If you recognized yourself in these signs, you are likely feeling a strange mixture of relief and grief. Relief, because your experience has finally been described accurately. Grief, because you now understand the full scope of what you carry and why it has been so isolating. Jung would tell you that recognizing what you are is the first step toward using your gift, rather than being used by it. Every characteristic that has caused you suffering was serving a function, protecting you, processing for you, perceiving for you. The suffering came from not understanding them, from suppressing them, or from deploying them in service of others while neglecting yourself. The super empath who understands their own configuration stops being overwhelmed by it. They learn to manage their absorption. They trust their pattern recognition. They honor their need for solitude. They stop apologizing for their intolerance of lies. They accept their depth. They act on their foresight. And they continue integrating their shadow, knowing that wholeness, not goodness, is the true goal. Jung believed that super empaths, when they finally understood themselves, became some of the most psychologically powerful people alive. Not powerful in the sense of control, but powerful in clarity, discernment, and an unshakable relationship with truth. They could perceive reality with a resolution others cannot access. They could navigate the human psyche with precision. And they could hold space for the full spectrum of experience. Light and dark, beautiful and terrible, without needing to simplify it. That capacity to hold complexity without flinching, to see everything and still choose to engage, is what makes the super empath genuinely rare. Not everyone who feels deeply qualifies. But those who do know, beneath all the exhaustion and isolation, that what they carry is significant. If this description fits you with uncomfortable accuracy, consider this confirmation extended to you. Your configuration is not a disorder. It is a way of being conscious that demands more from you, more solitude, more honesty, more courage. But it also gives more depth, more clarity, and a greater capacity to navigate a world that desperately needs people who can see clearly, even when clarity is painful. If you found value in this exploration, please like this video and subscribe to Winds of Thought for more journeys into the depths of psychology. And before you go, check out our new guide, True Self-Discovery, with 24 practical reflection exercises inspired by the teachings of Carl Jung, designed to help you find your way within. The link is in the description below.